Good evening all and welcome to the June Content Bonanza. I don't know how many of you here remember when I used to post every single day. Well, for June we're bringing it back. New stories, brand new, every single day, Monday through Friday. Fat compilation on the weekend just to top it off. And tonight for you, a very popular topic, middle of nowhere. But be warned, some of these stories are extremely graphic and very scary, so viewer discretion is advised. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In college, my best friend and I had a summer job culling trees on a remote property about 50 kilometers off from the nearest hospital or ambulance station. We both got the job at the same time and worked there for nearly 3 summers in teams of 5 guys. We were all highly skilled with the equipment and had undergone extensive safety training. 2 of the guys on the team were professional arborists. We had all the gear, chaps, helmets, gloves, everything. But as anyone who's spent time working with chainsaws will tell you, no amount of training or equipment can completely prevent unpredictable accidents. It was late August. We had just finished downing a 30-foot white pine and were in the process of removing the branches. My best friend was working his way down the trunk, methodically slicing through limbs like we'd done 100 times before. But this time, something went wrong. He hit a knot, a thick, misshapen one, and the chainsaw kicked back violently. I can still hear the horrible whine of the chain as it jerked out of control. Because of the awkward position he was in, the saw sliced into the beam between his chaps and his belt. Time seemed to freeze for a second. And then came the blood. So much blood. It started flowing immediately, soaking through his clothes and onto the ground. Everyone stopped, all of us frozen for a split second as the horror registered. Then instinct kicked in. 2 of the guys dropped their tools and rushed to stabilize him. I bolted for the car, knowing without a doubt we'd have to drive. There was no way an ambulance would reach us in time. We laid him in the back seat of the car, trying to keep pressure on the wound, his face pale and his breathing shaky. And I knew we had to move fast. I floored it, tearing it down the narrow dirt road as fast as I could without losing control. The guys were doing their best to stop the bleeding, but all I could hear was the panic in their voices. We were losing him. About 10 kilometers in, we finally hit a patch with cell coverage. I immediately called for an ambulance and arranged a rendezvous point along the highway, but I knew deep down we might not make it in time. I pushed the car faster, speeding down that lonely stretch of road, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. Every second counted. When we hit the 416, I floored it. I was going faster than I ever had in my life, praying that nothing would go wrong. But that's when we hit a nightmare scenario. About 25 kilometers from the hospital, we came across 2 cars, a white Nissan Altima and a Subaru Forester driving side by side and blocking both lanes. They weren't speeding. In fact, they were going slower than the speed limit, hovering around 75 kilometers an hour in an 100 kilometer an hour zone. I flashed my lights, honked desperately trying to signal that this was an emergency, but the woman in the Altima wouldn't budge. She slowed down deliberately. She matched the speed of the Subaru boxing us in. I was screaming at the wheel, begging for her to move, but she wouldn't. And for 10 agonizing minutes she kept us trapped, her brake lights taunting us. Blood was soaking through every bit of fabric we had in the car, and my best friend's pulse was growing weaker by the minute. I can still remember the plates of those cars burnt in my brain. When we finally got to the next exit ramp, I managed to squeeze past her on the inside and gun it. One of the guys in the back was covered in blood and was so enraged that he grabbed a blood-soaked t-shirt and threw it out the window as we passed. The t-shirt hit the hood of the Altima, leaving a streak of red as it slid up and over her windshield. I hoped to God that it would help her realize what she'd done. 5 kilometers down the highway, an OPP officer, like a state trooper or highway patrol, pulled alongside us, lights flashing. He saw what was happening, matched our speed, and cleared a path for us. At that point, my friend's pulse was barely there. The ambulance was waiting another 2 miles down the road, and when we got there, they transferred him within seconds. I jumped into the ambulance, and we tore off towards the hospital. But it was too late. My best friend died less than 1 kilometer from the hospital, just minutes away. While I was in the ambulance, the guys were back on the side of the road explaining everything to the officer when, unbelievably, the woman in the Altima showed up. I wasn't there for this part, but I heard all about it later. She marched up to the officer, completely oblivious to the blood-soaked scene around her, and started ranting about dangerous driving and how we were going to kill someone. She had no idea. The officer calmly led her to look inside my car, where the seats and floors were soaked in blood. Then he pointed to the other guys from my crew, covered head to toe in blood. He explained what had happened, and asked if what we said about her impeding the flow of traffic was correct, and she went silent. She was cited for several offenses, including unnecessary slow driving and dangerous driving. While he was writing the ticket, another call came through on his radio. It was about my friend. He stopped writing, walked over to my crew, and quietly told them that my friend had passed away. He didn't tell the woman in the Altima, but my crew sure did. Afterwards, the guy got in the car and came to meet me at the hospital. On their way there, they saw the Subaru Forester pulled over by another OPP officer. I hope they got what they deserved too. Here's the thing. If someone is trying to pass you, especially if they're flashing their lights or clearly in a hurry, just move over. You never know what's happening behind you. It might not be some jerk trying to get ahead. It might be someone rushing a loved one to the hospital, a child having a diabetic attack, or a tree surgeon bleeding to death in the back seat. Getting out of your way costs you nothing, but it could save a life. One summer, my family went camping deep in Olympic National Park. We had set up our tents near a quiet creek, miles from the nearest road. Early one morning, we packed our day bags to hike up one of the less traveled trails that wound into the higher country. As we left our site, we passed a group of young men at a neighboring spot, scruffy, loud, and clearly not your usual backpackers. They had 3 battered pickup trucks, all heavily loaded, and I watched one of them casually smear mud across the license plate of one of the vehicles. He looked up just long enough to notice me watching, then turned away. We didn't think much of it at the time. As part of tradition, we carried trash bags to pick up any litter along the trail. And about a mile in, we began to notice strange debris scattered along the path. Small, charred scraps of clothing at first. We assumed it was trash from an old fire. But the further we walked, the more concentrated and specific the items became. At first, there were bits of white, long underwear, then scraps of drab, green fabric that looked like uniform pants or maybe a work shirt. Then we found a burnt strap that unmistakably belonged to a bra. Some of the clothing still smelled faintly of smoke. Others had that acrid chemical scent burnt synthetic material leaves behind. Following the trail of scraps, we veered off the main path. About 100 yards into the woods, we came upon a small, recently abandoned campsite. There were 4 flattened patches in the mossy earth, where the tents had clearly been set up. A crude fire pit sat in the center. The ashes were still warm, sending up the occasional curl of smoke, and inside the fire pit was a scorched, blackened mass. It was impossible to tell what it had been, but the smell stopped us. Something beyond wooden fabric had burnt there. The entire clearing had an atmosphere that I struggled to describe. The air was too still, like the birds didn't even want to acknowledge that place, and we felt like we were being watched. But when you turned around, there was nothing there, just the deep green silence of Olympic forest. The hair on my arm stood up. I could tell everyone else in the family felt it too. No one wanted to speak while we were there. We didn't linger. We continued our hike, unsettled, casting nervous glances back the way we came, all the way up the trail and back down again. We kept circling back to that strange campsite in the smoldering pit. Who had been staying there? Why burn clothing especially so thoroughly? As we returned to the trailhead that afternoon, we were surprised to find a dozen forest rangers gathered near the stables. Several were preparing to mount up a ride into the backcountry. One of them flagged us down and asked if we had seen any signs of a female ranger. She hadn't returned to her post the night before, and radio contact had been lost since midday. We then told them everything about the young men, the smeared license plates, the burnt clothing trail, and the eerie campsite. The lead ranger grew visibly tense as we described the area. They took down every detail we could remember and thanked us grimly. But we never did find out what happened. No news report, no follow-ups. Just a lingering unanswered question that sometimes returns when the woods are quiet and the smoke from our own campsite curls into the dusk. What the hell happened to her? I hope that young woman was okay. A few weeks ago, I flew out to a small mountain town to look for a place to live. I'd been accepted into a graduate program that fall, and the school was nestled deep in the Appalachians. Gorgeous but isolated. My boyfriend came with me to help scout apartments, and before the trip, I combed Craigslist, messaged landlords, and booked 6 or 7 viewings over 2 days. The first was at 2 p.m. in a residential area at the very edge of town. Wooded, quiet, almost too quiet. There were no sidewalks and the houses were spaced far apart, each one buried behind trees and tall hedges. The landlord had emailed me that morning to confirm and asked that I call him about an hour before arriving. When I called, he didn't pick up. We went anyway, slim pickings in this town, and the pictures of the house looked fine. Quaint, a little weathered, but with a small porch and a yard. Maybe a little too cheap for what it offered, but I wasn't thinking about that at the time. We were standing on the curb trying to figure out whether to ring the doorbell or wait when my phone rang with an unknown number. "You coming?" the voice asked. It was a man. His tone was slow, measured, and weirdly flat. He sounded older, but not to be confused, just cold. "Yeah, we're here now," I said, forcing a cheer into my voice. There was a pause. "We?" "Oh, my boyfriend's with me." Another longer pause. "You never told me that." His voice sounded almost hurt. "You didn't say anything about a boyfriend." I laughed awkwardly. "He's just here for the trip. I'll be living alone." Then in the same unnerving cadence, "Sometimes women don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I don't like surprises." He hung up. I told my boyfriend what he said, and his expression shifted immediately. "Let's go. We'll find another place." But I hesitated. We'd just flown down for this. Maybe the guy was eccentric. Rural people can be a bit odd, right? Not everything's a red flag. As we debated, a man slipped out of the house and headed for a rusted-out old sedan parked down the block, mid-20s, skinny, eyes constantly scanning. His clothes were rumpled and stained, his hair stringy with grease, and he glanced up at us just once and practically sprinted to his car and peeled off so fast his tires screeched. That should have been the moment we left, but instead we stayed. And a few minutes later the landlord arrived. He was in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered and built like someone who still chops his own wood. He wore jeans stained dark at the knees and had a long-sleeved shirt that might have once been white. He didn't smile or blink. "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty," he said slowly. My boyfriend asked, "From what?" The man didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me. "Work." From that point on, he barely acknowledged my boyfriend at all. Every question he asked was directed at me. What program I was in? Did I have other places lined up? Would I really be living alone? My answers grew vaguer. My boyfriend, sensing the shift, started asking questions too, normal ones like how long the house had been for rent, what utilities were included. The landlord ignored him, didn't even look at him. Then without transition he said, "Let me show you the basement." We followed him around the back of the house, down a gravel path that crunched like broken teeth. The rear of the property backed up into dense wood, with no neighbors, no eyes. The door wasn't a basement entrance built into the house. It was a shed, separate from the main structure. He opened it with a rusted key, and inside there were stairs going straight down into the darkness. He flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. He didn't react. He just stood there at the top of the stairs staring into the dark. He muttered. Then he started descending 1, 2, 3. He paused in the shadows maybe halfway down. "On you coming?" "There's nothing to see if the light doesn't work," my boyfriend said firmly. The landlord didn't move, just lingered in the dark like something waiting. Then without a word he climbed back up, stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Inside the house things only got worse. The front door, our only exit, clicked shut and locked itself. When my boyfriend tried the handle, the man's mood shifted immediately. "Don't touch that. It stays closed." He claimed a grad student was living there already, but the signs didn't make sense. A few t-shirts in the closet neatly folded, a bowl of plastic-looking fruit on the counter, generic textbooks stacked on the kitchen table. No shoes by the door, no clutter. Nothing indicated that anyone had ever lived there. There was no food in the fridge, no utensils and no trash, no toothbrush in the bathroom. Like a museum of fake domestic life. There was only one door we hadn't seen, the attic. When I asked about it, he immediately shut me down. "It's not finished. You don't want to see that, it smells bad." He gave different reasons in under a minute. Furniture up there, construction, not safe. But the real reason was the smell. Near the attic door the air soured, thick, meaty rot like wet garbage. My boyfriend caught my eye, we didn't speak. We made an excuse. Another appointment across town and headed for the front door. My boyfriend unlocked it when the landlord wasn't looking and we stepped outside like we were walking on ice, and the man followed. He walked us to the driveway and pretended to fumble with his car keys like he was going to leave. But the moment we turned the corner and looked back, we saw him slip around the side of the house and go back inside. Not to his car and not to his keys. That night at the motel, my boyfriend wouldn't stop digging. He found the Craigslist listing again, traced the phone number, and found the man's name. He wasn't a realtor, never had been. The house, it was his, and that tenant, the The grad student he kept talking about? No one we could find had ever lived there. I think we escaped a very dubious situation. I was out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana, during the summer, when I walked into what honestly looked like the start of a horror movie. Some poor dude with zero outdoor experience, like didn't know the first thing about camping or hiking, had got himself into a seriously bad situation. It was around 7 in the morning when I came across the campsite. Right away, I noticed how weirdly quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just dead still. Then I spotted the tent, or what was left of it, shredded to hell under a tree. And not far from it, this guy completely covered in blood, curled up and whimpered like a wounded animal. I dropped my pack, grabbed my first aid stuff and ran over. He looked like he'd just lost a knife fight with some kind of monster, with deep cuts running from his shoulder down to his hip, and a bunch of puncture wounds on his back, and his arms and hands were torn up with what looked like defensive wounds. I patched him up as best I could, gave him some water and checked my map, and took off towards the nearest road. This was before smartphones were everywhere, and even if I had one, there's no actual signal out there anyway. Luckily, the road wasn't far, maybe 1.5 miles, and I managed to flag down a guy in a truck who sped off to get help. And I hung back until rescue showed up. Took him about an hour. I led them back to the guy, and I was honestly convinced he wouldn't still be alive, but somehow he was. I helped them carry him out, and they offered to take me into town to clean up. I wasn't going to say no to that. After I cleaned up, I gave them my number in case they needed follow-up, and I went home. 3 days later, I get home and there's a message on my answering machine. Turns out the guy I found had decided to just head out into the woods on a whim with no real prep, just vibes. He heard somewhere that you're supposed to hang your food in a tree to keep bears away, which, yeah, is true, but he tied the food directly above his tent, like literally over where he was sleeping, and it wasn't even that high. So that night, a black bear comes through, smells the food, and tries to climb the damn tree using the guy's tent, with him in it as a stepping stool. He woke up to 4 bear paws digging into him as it reached up. Somehow he survived, and apparently told the hospital staff he was moving to the city and never setting foot in the woods again. And honestly, I can't blame him. In early 2015, I was preparing for a grueling endurance mountain bike race in the cloud-covered mountains near Pereira, Colombia. The race spanned over 80 kilometers of treacherous terrain, dense jungle, narrow switchbacks, and steep inclines that tested even the most seasoned riders. I'd never done anything like it before, but I was determined. Months of training had pushed me to the limits, and by the time April rolled around, I was confident I was ready. To simulate race conditions, I started doing solo overnight bike packing trips deep in the surrounding mountain. I'd ride into the remote wilderness, camp for the night, and push myself through brutal climbs the next morning. I packed ultralight gear, just the essentials, so I wouldn't be weighed down. My kit included a small tent, dehydrated meals, water purification tablets, and an emergency whistle. For safety, I always carried a fixed-blade knife and a canister of pepper spray, though I doubted I'd ever need them. The most dangerous thing I expected to encounter was the occasional stray dog. By late March, I was venturing deeper into the mountains, exploring less familiar trails. One particular weekend, I set my sights on a remote route that wound through Los Nevados National Park. an area notorious for sudden weather changes and steep, unforgiving trails. I left my small apartment in Pereira early that Saturday morning, pedaling through the misty mountain passes as the humidity thickened. The scent of damp earth filled the air as the dense jungle closed it around me. After about 4 hours of riding, I veered off onto an old, barely used trail that climbed into the heart of the jungle. It was tough going. Mud caked my tires, and the humid air clung to my skin. Eventually, I stumbled upon an overgrown path that led to a small clearing, and there, leaning against a moss-covered tree, was a Cannondale mountain bike, rusted and forgotten. Strange, I muttered, wiping the sweat from my forehead. It looked like it had been there for years, the jungle slowly reclaiming it. But there was no sign of anyone around, no camp, no trail markings, nothing. Just that abandoned bike. I shook off the unease creeping up my spine and kept moving, but something didn't feel right. As I pedaled deeper into the jungle, the air grew thicker and still. The usual sounds of birds and insects had gone unnervingly quiet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling watched. But the path ahead was too inviting. I couldn't turn back now. I rode for another mile before deciding to set up camp. I found a small, relatively clear area tucked beneath a massive ceiba tree. As I pitched my tent, I noticed something odd. Scratches on the tree trunk. Long, deep gouges, as though something with claws had raked the bark. Maybe a jaguar, I thought to myself, but I was starting to feel bad. The night descended quickly, as it does in the jungle. I ate a quick meal, secured my food well away from the tent, and climbed into my sleeping bag. I was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of branches set me on edge. I told myself it was just the jungle, the wind, maybe a monkey. And around midnight, I woke up with a start. Something had woken me. I wasn't sure what, but my instinct screamed that I wasn't alone. I fumbled for my flashlight and shined it outside the tent, but there was nothing. But the jungle was unnervingly silent. No insects, no night birds. Just still. I stepped out of the tent, my heart pounding. The air felt heavy and wrong. I did a sweep with my light, and that's when I heard it. Ayuda, por favor. A faint trembling voice echoed from the darkness beyond the tree line. Ayuda, por favor. A faint, trembling voice echoed from the darkness just beyond the tree line. They were saying, help, please. It was a woman's voice, but there was something off about it. The words sounded distorted, like they were being mimicked, repeated. I stood frozen, with the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Hello? I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Ayuda, por favor. The voice came again, closer this time, but I couldn't see anything, just endless darkness pressing in on me. I took a step back towards the tent when I heard my name. Daniel. I froze. The voice was soft, but it was unmistakably like my mother's voice, only she was thousands of miles away. Daniel. Por favor. It echoed from somewhere in the jungle just beyond my sight. My blood turned to ice. It felt like something was watching me, something hungry. My hand instinctively gripped the handle of my knife. Come on, I muttered under my breath, backing into the tent. And that's when I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the faint light of my headlamp, low to the ground. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I grabbed my gear and didn't bother packing. I shoved everything into my frame bag, yanked my bike upright, and took off down the trail. My legs burnt as I pedaled harder than I ever had before, but the feeling didn't leave. It was following me. I couldn't see it, but I felt it pacing me, staying just out of sight, but always too close. I heard the occasional snap of a branch or the rustle of a leaf, but it was the low guttural sound like a deep growl that carried on the wind that nearly made me lose control of the bike. I pushed harder, heart pounding in my ears as I flew down the trail. By the time I hit the steep downhill section, I was drenched in sweat, and the fog had rolled in thick behind me. I could barely see 5 feet ahead, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I sped through switchbacks, barely missing roots and rocks, but the feeling wouldn't leave. I knew whatever it was still there. As I rounded the corner, my front tire slipped on a slick patch of mud, and my bike went out from under me, and as I crashed hard, pain shot through my leg. I didn't have time to think about it. I was sure it was right behind me. I hopped on my bike and pedaled with everything I could. I didn't stop until I saw the faint lights of a small roadside village. My lungs burned and my muscles screamed. But I kept going until I reached a dimly lit hostel near the edge of town, and I stumbled in, stinking, dirty, and nearly collapsing from exhaustion. I didn't manage to sleep that night. Every sound made my skin crawl. When I finally returned to Pereira the next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. A few days before my race, I met up with Don Miguel, an elderly local who had spent his life in those mountains, and I told him what happened. But that's when his face got serious. "You heard it," he said. "What?" I asked. "El tunche." I felt my blood drain from my face. Apparently this creature can mimic the voice of your loved ones, and if they have your name, they'll come after you. He didn't elaborate past that. I don't know what stalked me in those mountains, but I know I'll never go back to find out. Kentucky, 1984. I was 18 years old, broke, and desperate for escape. I worked double shift slinging food to coffee at Shoney's, trying to drown the memories of home in cheap alcohol. My stepfather was a drunk with fists, and my mother turned her back every time he laid his hands on me. Every inch of that house felt soaked in trauma. So when Amanda, who was older, tougher, and reckless, offered me a room in her trailer across town, I jumped without thinking. It was a squat little mobile home in a worn-down park on the edge of the woods. Her bedroom was at the end. Mine was a glorified closet at the other. The room had a single window that was low to the ground with no curtain. At first I felt free. Amanda and I worked late shifts, drank too much, and partied with the guys from work. We never thought to lock the doors, not in our sleepy little town, not in a place where crime meant someone forgetting to return a lawnmower. But that changed one night. We came home after closing and found the kitchen window curtain pushed up and a lawn chair right underneath it, like someone had been sitting there just watching us, watching the driveway. We brushed it off. Probably drunk us, forgot to close the curtain, probably bumped the chair. That's when we started locking the door. The feeling had changed. Something felt off. A few nights later, after too much pool and too many shots with our boyfriends, we came home and I was dead tired and ready to crash. I peeled off in my tiny bedroom and shut the door beside me. It was silent and still. I stood by the bed facing the window. The light was still on, and the glass reflected the room back to me like a mirror. But I had a bad feeling, like I was being watched. I stepped forwards, cupped my hand to the glass and leaned in, trying to pierce the outside darkness, but I couldn't see anything. I just shook it off. Must just be nerves. The people had been talking about some creep watching women through their windows. Peeping Tom stories felt too cartoonish to believe. I kicked off my shoes, pulled off my top, and the feeling hit me again, but more suffocating this time and stronger. I turned towards the window, heart hammering, and then he was standing there just inches away on the other side of the glass. A man, tall and thin, face half hidden by shadow, and what looked like a hoodie or jacket pulled tight around his head, just watching me undress. I screamed loudly. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. My boyfriend Joe, Amanda, and her guy David burst in. I'd pointed, sobbing, trying to explain. But when they tore out the door, the man was already gone. The cops came and they took statements and told us the stories were true. Someone had been prowling the trailer park at night, watching women and standing in the dark. One woman claimed he'd been inside her house watching her sleep. Amanda lost it. She called the landlord and refused to spend another night there. To his credit, he didn't argue. We moved across town the next day, changed the locks, and nailed blackout curtains over every window. And that should have been the end of it. But then my cousin Denise, who lived in the same trailer park, told us what happened to her. She woke up in the middle of the night to something wet on her foot. She kicked out, and a man bolted from the end of her bed and vanished through the screen door. He had been sucking her toes while he slept. I remember the police interviewing her and she cried. They looked uncomfortable. No arrests, no answers. No one ever saw his face. But I still think about that moment, his silhouette in my window, and I wonder how long he'd been standing there. I wonder if he'd been inside. I wonder if he followed me when I moved. When you think of dangerous things out in the middle of nowhere, you might assume bear or wolves, or maybe some nonsense ghost story passed down around the fire. But the truth is, the thing that really needs to be feared out in the woods are people. It was supposed to be a chill trip, 5 of us, all guys in our early 20s, out in a remote part of the national forest, well off the grid. Far from any cell signal, no rangers nearby, just dense trees, distant peaks, and a couple of coolers full of beers. Typical backcountry escape. We had a good spot too, near a stream, far from any marked trails, and we thought we were completely alone. Late afternoon, right as the sun was starting to dip, a dusty old van came crawling down the dirt access road. This wasn't a trailhead parking area. It certainly shouldn't have been there. At first we figured it was just lost hikers, or maybe hunters. But as soon as the van stopped, we knew something was off. 2 guys stumbled out, with greasy, matted hair, torn up jeans, and one of them was barefoot. The other kept tugging his sleeve like something was going to crawl out from underneath. They didn't say hello. They didn't smile. They just loitered, standing there about 30 feet from our camp, wild-eyed and twitchy, like they hadn't slept in days. Eventually, they wandered towards the old outhouse near the edge of the tree line, and that's when the real chaos started. We heard them shouting inside, not at us but to each other, screaming nonsense, animalistic growling mixed with slurred curses, then pounding, fists slamming the walls, like they were trying to knock the place down from the inside. We froze. You expect raccoons or maybe a bear to disrupt your trip, not two meth-tweaked lunatics smashing up the woods toilet. It didn't take us long to realize whatever they were doing wasn't innocent. One of them walked back towards our camp, tried to ask for water, then pivoted mid-sentence and started asking weird questions. How long you boys staying? You alone out here? The other guy kept scanning the gear around our fire pit, eyes darting from our tent to the coolers. We didn't answer. We just picked up weapons. Each of us grabbed what we had, a splitting axe, long branches, even a shovel. We didn't say a word. We just let them see. 5 young guys standing tall and silent with sharp steel and heavy wood in our hands. We weren't tourists, and we weren't going to be easy targets. It sort of worked. They hung around muttering, circling the edge of the clearing like feral dogs waiting for someone to flinch. They stayed for hours just beyond the trees, shadows moving at the edge of our firelight. They were doing this deliberately. They wanted us to leave, and every so often a laugh would echo through the trees. We took turns keeping watch. We sat by the fire all night with our weapons in our laps. No one slept. Every sound became a threat, and every flicker in the dark could have been one of those creeps with a knife. By dawn they were gone. Van 2, no tracks, no sign. I've camped dozens of times before, but that trip changed something. Because the truth is, there's nothing more terrifying out in the wilderness than another human who has nothing to lose. One of my closest friends and I had a tradition we never missed, camping together every Thanksgiving Day, no matter where we were in life. It was our ritual, something we started over a decade ago, and it stuck. Just the two of us, out in the cold, catching up and resetting. That year we chose a remote area deep in the Adrianax, not far from Blue Mountain Lake. We got there just before midnight, hiking with a headlamp and backpacks, the snow barely crusting the ground. There wasn't a single other car in the small half-buried lot. No other tents, no fires in the distance, just us, the trees, and the distant hum of wind brushing through frozen pine. The next morning we were up at first light. The sun had barely crested the treetops when we set out on a trail that looped around the lake we'd camped near before. One of those narrow, winding Adrianac paths that looked like it was carved by deer. The air was ice cold, chill and perfectly still. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of snow underfoot, and our breath misting out ahead of us. We were deep in conversation like always, talking about where life had taken us, how things had changed, how some things hadn't. That lake, still rimmed with frost, looked like glass framed in snow-covered stone. There wasn't a single ripple. Then we heard it, a branch snapping behind us. We stopped and looked around, but couldn't see anything. We hadn't seen a soul since arriving, so we figured it was probably a deer, maybe an old tree giving its way to the cold. But then we walked a little further, and we heard it again, closer and heavier. We turned, squinting in the forest, and that's when we saw it. There was a figure over 6 feet tall, standing behind the trees, maybe 20 yards off the trail, big, broad-shouldered and dark. It was still watching. For a second I thought it was a person in hunting gear, but then it moved slowly and unnaturally, and the shape didn't make sense. It was built like a bear, but it stood upright, no antlers, no fur, just massive. We had nothing but a dull pocket knife and a small sheathed blade, not exactly predator defense. We kept moving, trying to stay calm and trying not to run, but the thing was following us still behind the trees, always the same distance back, moving when we moved. Then we found the buck. It was lying across the trail, torn clean in half. Fresh blood smeared the snow in huge arcs, with chunks of meat scattered into the underbrush like something had slammed it against the trees. The steam still rose from it, and we stopped dead. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle, just sheer carnage. We stood there for what felt like hours not speaking. Then we turned and kept moving, fast but steady. Neither of us looked back until the trail curved, and when we did, it was gone. That's when we bolted. We tore through the forest, back to camp, breaking all the quiet we'd respected for the past day. We packed everything in under 5 minutes and hiked out like something was right behind us. When we found a ranger later that afternoon, he didn't laugh, just got quiet and said there'd been unverified reports of large predators, cougars, maybe even something bigger, being spotted in the deeper parts. But there'd been nothing confirmed, no photos or prints. We never figured out what we saw that morning. I spent years in the woods and I've never felt anything like that presence, not before and not since. But I haven't been back to that part of the mountain, and I'm not sure I ever will. In the mid-80s, my mum worked as a residential cleaner in Australia. Most of her jobs were in quiet suburban neighborhoods, but she also took occasional work in the rural wine regions nearby. It was solitary work, but she liked it that way. She'd leave her business card in local shops and build a solid client base through referrals and word of mouth. People trusted her. One day she got a phone call from an older woman. She sounded polite, but a bit strange. The woman needed her for her old farmhouse. She was vague on details, but made several specific demands: that the windows must be polished inside and out, the rooms cleaned in a particular order, and no personal items touched under any circumstances. My mum, who normally insisted on meeting new clients in person first, offered to set up a time, but the woman refused. "No need," she said. "I'll leave the keys under the mat, just let yourself in." Mum was going to decline. Something about the call felt off. But that's when the woman offered nearly triple her standard rate. The money was hard to turn down. That Monday morning, Mum drove out to the house. The property was vast and endless fields on every side, with a single gravel driveway that stretched far into the distance. It was quiet. Too quiet. The house itself was large, and there were no other cars nor signs of life. Inside, it was dim and cold. Mum noticed that most of the furniture was covered with dusty white sheets. She assumed the house hadn't been lived in for years. Still, she got to work, kitchen first, then the lounge. About an hour in, she was scrubbing the kitchen sink when she heard it. A soft, unmistakable click. The sound of the back door closing. Not slamming, just shutting quietly. She froze. The woman had insisted no one would be home, and there was no other car. Mum stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, her heart thudding in her chest. Movement, footsteps, creaking floorboards, but the house was still. She considered running, but she only had 2 rooms left, the bedrooms. She told herself maybe it wasn't the door at all. Maybe something fell. Maybe it was the wind. She walks down the hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath her. The first bedroom was completely empty, nothing but dust filtering through yellowed curtains. Then she opened the second bedroom. The bed was the first thing she saw, which was covered in black and white photographs laid out in careful, deliberate rows. And that's when her stomach dropped. They were all of her. Photos taken from a distance, through windows, over fences, dozens of different houses she had cleaned over the past year. Some showed her vacuuming, others wiping counters, entering doorways, stepping out of her car. One was her holding a bucket looking directly at the camera through a window, eyes mid-blink, completely unaware. She felt like the air had been punched out of her. Hands trembling, she picked up the phone in the hallway, one of those old rotary ones, and dialed the police. Then she bolted outside, drove to the end of the long gravel driveway and waited. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line, but she refused to go back. When the police arrived, they searched the house, but found no one. There were no signs of forced entry. The woman who had hired my mom was contacted and insisted the house had been locked up for months. She claimed someone must have broken in and that it had nothing to do with her, but nothing was stolen nor vandalized, just those photos. The police investigated the woman, but she kept insisting she was innocent. She never returned calls. Eventually, the investigation dried up. No arrests were made, and 4 months later we moved to a different town. And Mum never accepted another rural job again. To this day, she's convinced the woman knew exactly what she was doing, setting up a trap or sending a message. We'll never know what the real plan was, or what might have happened if Mum had gone into the bedroom just a little earlier. The creepiest part? Some of those pictures had been taken months before the woman ever called.
We went camping for the weekend. We went out on a Thursday, drove into the Tall Pine Back County in northern Montana, about 18 miles from the nearest town. We had enough supplies for 6 days. It was me, my partner Elise, her brother Carson, and his 3 boys aged 6, 7, and 9. We also brought our 2 dogs, Max and Dottie. The first day was great. We hiked, fished, and made s'mores at night. The dogs ran around off leash and loved it. Nothing unusual happened. Second day, same thing. Weather was good. We played cornhole, board games with the kids, and hiked up a nearby ridge to get above the trees. We didn't see or hear anyone else out there, just forest in every direction. But around 6 p.m. something changed. The dogs started acting differently. They were pacing the edges of camp, growling quietly, staring into the woods like they were on alert. This wasn't something they normally did. We figured perhaps they'd smelled a bear or a mountain lion. We had firearms and kept the kids close, so we weren't too worried. That night after the kids were asleep, the 3 of us stayed up around the fire. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not paranoia, just a weird gut feeling. I've been camping for years and dealt with bears and moose and everything you can think about. But this didn't feel like any of that. It was just off. When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep more than half hour at a time. I kept hearing what sounded like sticks breaking out in the wood. Not loud, but just enough to keep me on edge. The next morning, nothing in the camp looked out of place, but Carson thought something had happened to our water. We had 6 5-gallon jugs, one in his SUV, and the other 2 left outside were now completely empty. No puddles, no leaks. We thought maybe the boys had knocked them over, but it didn't look like it. We talked about cutting the trip short. Elise and I both agreed that something didn't feel right. The boys were disappointed, but the dogs were still acting odd, sniffing like crazy, staying close and pacing non-stop. It was like they knew something was out there. After lunch, we started breaking down camp. With 3 kids, it took a while, and by the time we got everything packed up and loaded out, it was close to dinner time. We heated up some food and got ready to head out. The boys asked to do one last snipe hunt before we left. We said okay, still had an hour of daylight. Carson led the way through the woods in the big circle. Elise stayed in the middle with kids, and I took the rear. I tossed a few rocks and sticks when they weren't looking. Classic snipe hunt stuff, to look for them and keep the game fun. Right before we got back to camp, a big rock, about the size of 2 fists, came flying out of the trees. It barely missed the boys. The other adults turned around and looked at me, and I said that wasn't me. Then another rock came and hit me hard in the back. We didn't ask. Carson and Elise each grabbed a kid. I grabbed the third, and we ran. As we got closer to the vehicles, we could hear something moving in the trees behind us. Large, branches breaking and bushes shaking. We didn't stop to look. We threw the kids in and drove away. About a quarter of a mile down the road, things got worse. The road was covered in animal carcasses and bones, head missing, limbs torn. Some were fresh, some just bones. We had to steer around them to keep driving, and this went on for at least half a mile. After that, the road cleared up. A few more miles down, we passed a clearing with an old green school bus parked off to the side. I told Elise to wait in the car, and I radioed Carson, who was ahead of us, and got out to check the bus. It looked like it hadn't moved in years. Tires flat, windows covered with newspaper and tape, and peeling paint. Near it was a large fire pit. It was filled with bones. There were strange symbols painted on the bus, and hanging from the trees, little dead animals tied up with string. Definitely not a few of my favorite things. I didn't get any closer. I turned around and ran back to the truck. I got in and told Elise we were leaving. We caught up to Carson and drove the rest of the way back to the highway and didn't stop. We never reported it. I don't know what we saw. Could have been poachers, some kind of cult, or maybe something else. I don't really want to know, but we haven't been back since. I was pulling a fifth-wheel trailer somewhere in the desert on Old Highway 191, a long, empty stretch of road running through the heart of the Southwest. It was just past noon, sun beating down, and we were outside a small town. It was hot and dry. My wife and our baby were in the truck. I got out, started jacking the trailer up and working on the tire. Then a pickup pulls up behind us. "Need any help?" the guy behind asks. There was something in his voice, or maybe the way he didn't wait for an answer, that put me on edge. "No, I got it." But he keeps walking. That's when the training kicked in. I carry legally, and I keep it holstered unless there's a reason, and this felt like one. I drew my sidearm low and ready, took a step to block his approach, and repeated myself, "I don't need any help." He stopped, watched me for a second, and then turned around without a word and got back in his truck like nothing happened. I let out a breath,
and then 2 flashing lights. 2 Navajo police units rolled up behind me. One of the officers got out and asked if I'd seen a man in a truck matching a description. Said they were chasing down a suspect who had just robbed a nearby bank. I just pointed down the road, that way, and they sped off without another word. I stood there for a long while, not moving. When I finally got back to fixing that tire, my hands were shaking. It took me over an hour, but I got it done. This is from someone who worked 6 years in hazardous materials and engineering with the army. I've dealt with chemical threats, biological scares, radiation, the whole CBRNE alphabet soup. But nothing rattled me like that day on Old Highway 191.
This happened a few years back, in the thick pine forests of northern Washington. My buddy and I were hiking in a remote spot for an overnight camp. Real isolated. No service, no trail cams, no people. Just deep woods. In the middle of nowhere. We were supposed to make it to the site before dark, but we got delayed. By the time we were halfway there, the sun had already dipped behind the mountains. And not long after that, it was pitch black. The kind of darkness where your flashlight beam looks like it's fighting the night instead of cutting through it. But we kept going. Every little sound around us started to feel too loud. You know what I mean? Like every twig snap had intention behind it. Like something was letting us know that it was out there with us. We were perhaps a mile from camp when my friend suddenly stopped. He said he saw the trail marker up ahead. I looked where he was pointing, and yeah, I saw it too. 2 bright reflections, like little glass beads catching the light. But something felt off, the spacing too wide, and too high up the ground. I stepped forward a bit and realized it was no marker. Those were eyes. 2 glowing eyes, far apart, staring directly at us, not blinking, not moving, just watching. Then without warning, they did this strange bobbing motion, like the little head tilted or maybe it crouched, and then gone, slipped back into the black without a single sound. We both pulled out the knives we kept in our packs. Not that it would have helped much, but it was something. We just walked fast, made it to the site in silence, and both of us were constantly turning to check behind us. When we got there, we lit a fire right away, a big one, way bigger than necessary. But it wasn't about heat, it was about light, about drawing a line between us and whatever was out there. The weirdest part? We still hadn't talked about it. Not until hours later, when we were too tired to pretend everything was fine. We just sat there going over it again and again, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince ourselves it was a deer or an elk or anything. But deep down, we knew it wasn't. The way it moved, the way it watched us, that wasn't prey behavior. That was predator. We barely slept. Maybe half an hour just after dawn. The moment the birds started chirping, we packed up and got out. We didn't even eat, we just left. But here's the part that still chills me to this day. I think it had been following us for a while, just stalking us and waiting. And the second it let us see it was no accident. It was a message. It knew exactly what it was doing. We were 19, newly married, newly naive, and suffocating in a studio apartment we could no longer afford. The world felt big, ripe for adventure, and we wanted to escape the fluorescent choke of suburbia and find freedom in dirt roads and open skies. And when we saw the ad, it felt like fate. Looking for help on my horse ranch in the high country. Room, board, and mentorship provided.
learn trades, live free. The picture showed a picturesque log cabin nestled in a mountain valley. Split rail fences, thick pine woods, galloping horses, a utopia for two broke kids chasing a romantic fantasy. The man behind the ad, Eldon, seemed warm and wise over email. He spoke of we, of others who'd passed through, of a ranch filled with life and learning. His message dripped with mentorship and promise. But when we arrived, there was no we. There was only him. He was a guy in his 60s, strong, composed, and eerily present. His handshake lingered just a second too long, and his first words were, "I don't judge anyone for their past. Everyone deserves a second chance. You believe that, right?" He smiled as he said it, but there was something hollow behind his eyes, a lurking kind of hunger. He drove us to the ranch himself, deep in the forgotten reaches of the Smoky Pines, with no neighbors, no cell signal, and no sound but wind and insects. The log cabin loomed like a monument to isolation. His world, his rules. At first, he played the gracious host, told us to grab anything we wanted from the store, filled the fridge with things he said we might like, but his hospitality came with a strange stiffness. He gave us the upstairs bedroom. Just across the hall was the only bathroom, with a door that locked only for his room. That was when the first dread began to unfurl. His bedroom was a shrine to control. Neat, clean, obsessively so. On a desk near the bed sat a vintage camcorder, with dozens of unmarked tapes stacked like trophies. We never asked what was on them. He spoke often of his fondness for the Japanese and how graceful they were, and how they had a natural obedience. The way he said it made my skin crawl. The way he talked about it, it was almost like they were broken things he planned to fix. And all the people who had stayed before, according to him, they always left suddenly. We thought it was just awkwardness at first, social ineptitude, but things escalated. One morning, Eldon demanded we get into the truck and told us we were heading into the city, with no explanation. Hours later, he told us to start approaching a young woman, thin and alone, and invite them back to the ranch. He said we needed more helping hands. We refused. He scowled, his smile thinning. "You kids don't understand hospitality." From then on, the mask slipped further. His mood swung violently. One moment chipper, the next icy and volatile. He'd lash out verbally, mutter under his breath, and we caught him watching us at night through the cracks in the door when we got up to use the bathroom. Once I heard him breathing just outside it, soft and deliberate. He spoke in detail about how we could stay forever, how we could raise a family there, how the land had everything we'd ever need. "Imagine Christmas here, snow on the ground, little ones by the fire. You belong here." The word belong didn't feel like an invitation, more like a trap. One night during a strange ritual under the full moon, a fire ringed with stones, odd chanting, and Eldon dressed in white robes, I knew we were in something wrong. My husband and I locked eyes across the flames. We were now no longer playing house on some whimsical horse ranch. We were being watched, tested, and owned. Then came the email from my mother. "Google him now." And we did. Arrest records, assault charges, a warning blog filled with stories exactly like ours, people who'd stayed at Devil's Hollow Ranch. They wrote about his obsession with Japanese girls, the broken bathroom locks, the hidden microphones, and the bizarre rituals. They watched his tapes. Some showed girls flexing their arms in front of the camera, confused and silent, One person described pages of grotesque artwork, women in bondage, bleeding and smiling. He was never charged with anything more than assault. There wasn't enough evidence, not near enough proof, just enough fear to silence most. We booked our flight immediately, but telling him we were leaving, that was the real terror. I made up a lie about an emergency. He stared through me, eyes dark and unreadable. Before I could even finish my sentence, he said, "When's your flight?" Flat, cold and robotic. He drove us to the airport smiling, offering to pay for our tickets if we ever wanted to come home, but we never looked back. Years later, I returned to the forum. Story after story, all echoing the same nightmare. Women who felt watched, couples who were isolated, people being recruited off the street. Some claimed to have escaped just hours before something terrible was going to happen. And he's still out there, still recruiting, still operating under a new name, new ads, always smiling, always promising paradise. But the ranch is no home, it's a snare. And the man who built it doesn't want workers, he wants property. My grandfather shared this story with me. It happened back when he was a teenager, on a camping trip with his grandparents, deep in the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. They'd chosen a secluded spot near a quiet glacial lake, surrounded by towering spruce and cedar. From the moment they arrived, my grandpa couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept saying he felt watched, like something just beyond the trees was observing them silently. Even my grandma, who wasn't the superstitious type, said that the woods felt off. They spent the day camping, fishing, and exploring nearby trails, but that uneasy feeling never left. As night fell and the temperature dropped, they built a large fire to keep warm and cooked a simple dinner. Eventually they settled into their tents, hoping for a good night's sleep. Around midnight the noises began. At first it was distant, branches snapping, something pacing just out of sight. But then came a sound none of them could explain. It's like a wolf's howl, only much deeper, distorted, as if whatever made it was far larger than a wolf, and maybe not quite an animal. The sound echoed across the lake and through the trees, chilling them to the bone. Worried, my grandpa decided to stay up and keep the fire going. He sat by the flames with his rifle in his lap, staring into the tree line. He didn't want to admit it out loud, but he was afraid. He'd hunted all his life and camped in harsher, more remote areas, but he said this was different. This fear didn't come from logic or survival instinct. It felt primal. And at around 2:30 in the morning, something changed. The night fell dead silent, no insects, no sounds from the lake, no breeze, just the low crackling of the fire. Grandpa said the air felt charged, like right before a lightning strike. He unzipped the tent flap just to peek outside, and that's when he saw it. A huge pitch-black figure, slowly walking around their fire in a wide arc. It moved smoothly, almost gliding. It was humanoid in shape, but way too tall, at least 8 feet and unnaturally thin. Its arms hung low, nearly to its knees. The strangest part was its face, or lack of one. There were no features, just a smooth, shadowy surface, except for 2 enormous amber eyes that seemed to glow from within, unblinking, and staring directly into the tent, as if he knew he was watching. Then came the smell. Grandpa said it hit him all at once, a stench so foul and overwhelming it made him gag. It was like rotting meat, mixed with sulfur and stagnant water. He said it smelled like death itself, and not recent death either. Something old and forgotten. He ducked back inside his tent, heart pounding, but before he could zip it closed, he caught one last glimpse through the flap. The figure was retreating into the trees, and it wasn't alone. 3 more just like it was standing further back in the woods, completely still, like they had been waiting. He loaded his rifle and sat there in silence for the rest of the night, locked on the entrance, ears straining for any sound, but nothing else happened. As soon as dawn broke, they packed up camp in record time and left without breakfast. To this day, my grandpa says that was the most terrifying experience of his life, and he's a Vietnam vet. This story still gives me nightmares, and I believe every word of it. When I was in college, I lived directly on campus in one of the dorm buildings, and the campus of my small college was not located in the local city, but a bit outside from it, and surrounded by a lot of agricultural landscape with endless fields and dirt roads, rarely some small woods. I really liked it there, because you could go for chill walks and run through the field without much disturbance from city life and other people except for some hunters and farmers. So fast forward to one time when me and 2 friends went for a walk through the field via the dirty paths at 11 p.m. on a warm late summer day. We chatted and laughed about silly stuff while making our way further and further away from campus. The only stuff you saw were the red lights of wind turbines and small towns in the distance, and here and there a bat flying over our heads. We had no lights on us, and only one had his mobile phone with him. When we were about 5 kilometers away from campus, we checked on maps, we got to a crossing and wondered where to go to make it a loop back to campus without going the same way we came from. We decided for the path which went to the right, and then things got weird. Bear in mind we were all tall guys in our early 20s. The first thing I noticed was a shadowy thing moving in the distance down the path we started to take. It was barely noticeable, but definitely something was moving there. The others noticed it too, and we joked about some horror movie stuff but shrugged it off as a deer that was crossing the path. We continued further into the path and forgot about the shadow until we saw a high-seat perch. They are everywhere for hunters near the path. We decided to climb it to take the rest and enjoy the dark landscape. In the distance you could see the silhouette of some of the small wooded areas. As I was gazing around, my eyes caught some lights moving through the wooded area. I wiped my eyes when I looked again and saw that it was a person with some kind of headlamp running through the woods. Like not jogging, like full force sprint in a parallel direction to our spot. We checked later on Google Maps and there was no path through that wooded area. I told the others, and together we followed the lights all the way to the right side of the woods, when one of my friends decided it would be funny to scream in the direction of the person. He screamed something like, "Hello!" and the light of the headlamp turned around directly in our direction. After a few seconds it turned off completely, and we couldn't see the person anymore. And then the eerie feeling kicked in for all of us. I don't know why, but the idea of a random person in the middle of nowhere that kind of knows where we are but can't see anymore scared the hell out of us. We climbed off the hunting perch and booked it off the way we came from at a pretty fast walking pace. While on the way back, we kept looking back behind us if something was following us, and I swear we saw some shadow moving again down the path behind us, but it was probably just a hallucination. We climbed off the hunting perch and booked it off the way we came from at a pretty fast pace. While on the way back, we kept looking back behind us if something was following us, and I swear we saw some shadows move again down the path behind us, but it was probably just a hallucination, because we had this eerie feeling now. Back to campus, we went to one of the guys' dorms, downed a beer, and talked about what happened. We couldn't find a good explanation why a person would act like that in the woods. Hunters don't usually sprint full force here, especially not alone. Only if there's a big group that hunt, but it would have been loud with many dogs. and a trail runner at 11 p.m. in a random wooded area with no trails also seemed off. Anyway, we never found out who it was, and kept away from that part of the path in all upcoming walks in future. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's stories in the middle of nowhere. Don't forget to join me tomorrow for day 2 of the June Content Bonanza. I'm going to be hitting you up for some ghost stories, so be sure to tune in. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you would like some cool exclusive perks for a tiny amount of money every month that goes to me, it would mean a lot. You can follow the links in the description to find out more. But until tomorrow, stay awesome and good night.